I'm director of Baker Richards, which is a consulting and software firm based in Cambridge in the UK. We have been going since 2003. This is our lovely team. And what Baker Richards is all about is fostering a thriving cultural sector by helping cultural organisations achieve their commercial potential. These are just a few of the more than 500 organisations around the world that we have worked with. And it's important to say that while what we do is focused on helping organisations increase their sales and income, we recognise that, of course, this isn't an end in itself for cultural organisations. Our organisations don't exist for the purpose of making profit. But if we can help organisations increase sales and income, then that's all income that can be reinvested back into helping organisations achieve their artistic and social aims. And if we can help you develop your relationships with audiences, which is what I'm here to talk about today, then that in turn feeds that thriving cultural sector. So today I'm going to be talking about the role of data in informing and shaping artistically led organisations. Our perspective on data comes from our experience working on consulting projects, but we also operate a data warehouse known as the Arts Engines platform. This was developed by Baker Richards in partnership with a company based in the US called Jacobson Consulting Applications. This platform feeds the audience agency's Audience Finder initiative in the UK. It also drives Citywide and other collaborative projects in the US. And we also enable organisations to drill deeper into their own data using an application called the Segmentation Engine. I'll show some examples from all of these, as well as from our consulting work in the presentation today. But as you can see, our warehouse holds data from over 450 organisations on over 64 million customers in respect of nearly 3 million performances and events and on over 475 million seats. So we know a little bit about big data, which I guess is why I'm standing here today. So what's the value of data in an artistically led organisation? And what is data-driven decision-making? Data-driven decision-making means making organisational decisions based on actual data rather than decisions which are over-reliant on past experience, solely intuitive, or based on guesswork or instinct. Now, it's important to say that instinct and intuition does have its place, including for thinking outside of the box. But equally remember that without data, you really are just another person with an opinion. Without data, the risk is that bias and assumptions creep in. Data-driven organisations tend to be characterised by a dedication to ongoing improvement. They're not just using data for monitoring after the event or using data to justify decisions that they're going to make anyway. Data-driven organisations use data to inform as many decisions as possible. Yet in the recent digital culture survey undertaken by the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts in the UK, only 34% of organisations said that they were well served for skills in data analysis. So if data helps drive organisational development and improvement, then there's work to be done to build our skills in this area. Importantly, data is not just about reporting to funders or about governance at board meetings. What I want to talk about today is about using data to refine, evolve, and optimise what we do and how we do it. So I'm going to be talking today mainly about the importance of transaction data for those organisations that have it. Transaction data can answer many important questions. It can tell us a little bit about who is coming to our organisations. For example, if we've got discount codes that tell us about the young people who are attending or about our subscribers. It can tell us about what people are attending. Crucially, it can also tell us about what they aren't attending. We can learn about where people come from and where they attend. We can understand when they attend and when they buy. We can understand more about how often they come, how many tickets they typically buy, and how much for. But quantitative data doesn't, in general, tell us about why people are coming. Having said that, there are organisations where we see spikes of repeat visits at 52-week intervals, indicating that people are attending for birthdays, annual anniversaries, or seasonal treats. So sometimes we can read something into the data about why people are coming. But I just want to touch on qualitative data for a moment, which can tell us more about the why. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Alan Brown's work around intrinsic impact. I just want to stress the importance of bringing quantitative data together with that qualitative data, and just reference some work we did together with Alan for the Liverpool Arts Regeneration Consortium in the UK. This included 7 organisations in Liverpool, the Liverpool Everyman and Playhouse, FACT, Tate, the Liverpool Philharmonic, Unity Theatre, the Liverpool Biennial, and Bluecate. One of the most interesting findings of the project that we did was exploring the value of data in informing strategic conversations. Here's a spidergram comparing key impact indicators across 5 different productions for the Liverpool Everyman and Playhouse, which we shared in the report of the project. The point here is that the value isn't so much in the raw data. It's not really about whether a production scores 3.4 or 3.6 on a particular indicator. It's really about how this stimulates conversation around the extent to which productions are delivering on expectations of the impact that they would deliver, and how the organisation's programming is considering the different impacts that it wants to have for different audiences with different productions. The point here is that data is not an end in itself. It's really about how we use it in those conversations to shape and inform what we do. So if we just go back to transaction data for a moment, I just want to make an aside here about the importance of coding. So we're not just using raw data, but we're making that data valuable in a way that's more helpful to inform those strategic conversations. So, for example, we might want to understand things not just by the date on which they happened, but perhaps coding whether a performance was a gala or a preview, understanding that that will behave differently. Perhaps understanding when a performance falls on Easter weekend, which aggravatingly doesn't occur on the same date every year. Interestingly, we're doing a piece of work for the Metropolitan Opera at the moment, looking at the impact of their newly introduced programming on Sundays. We want to be able to compare differences when performances happen by day of week, or trends by month or season. We want to be able to distinguish matinees from evening performances to understand the different roles that those performances play for different audiences. We need to be able to separate out performances in different auditoria to make sure that our comparisons are meaningful. Crucially, we need to be able to group our discount types for analysis. Most of the organisations we work with typically have hundreds of different discount codes in their system, because every time they do a special offer, they want to be able to track that particular offer. The problem is, if you've got 600 codes in your system, that's not very meaningful for analysis. So you need to be able to aggregate those to understand them in a more meaningful way. And then we need to think about repertoire coding. So how are we coding performances to compare them in a way that extracts genuine value? I'm going to come back to this later on. The point here is that how you decide to code your data, whether that's within your individual organisation or across organisations as part of a collaborative project, determines how valuable your information will be. So I think it's helpful to understand that we can look at transaction data from 2 different perspectives. First of all, there's sales data. This is where we're looking at performances that we put on and who purchases the tickets for them. This can provide valuable data like total and average sales, percentage capacity sold, total and average income, data on the inventory that was sold, the inventory that wasn't sold, and the income per ticket. But this is also historically how organisations have thought about their marketing. So I've got a performance coming up. Let's imagine it's a ballet. So what happened last time we had a ballet? Who purchased that? Maybe that's a useful way of thinking about who I might get to come to the ballet performance that I have coming up. At Baker Richards, we would argue that we need a revolution in our organisations to turn our way of looking at data and our marketing upside down. So instead we start from the perspective of the customer. If we look at our different customers and what they come to, then instead we start asking the question, how can we build our relationship and our engagement with our customers? What else might they be interested in? How might they engage with us next? What else might they come to? Rather than simply thinking about who we can sell the next show to. So to give an example of this, I wanted to share some work that we've been doing with the Royal Shakespeare Company. Now, I have to give thanks to Becky Loftus, who is Head of Audiences and Insight at the Rsc, for the analogy here, which is that building a picture of your audience is like making a cake. So, we see behavioural segmentation as the cake itself. Segmentation is the art or practice of dividing your audience into groups with similar characteristics. In this case, the case of behavioural segmentation, based on how they behave in relation to your organisation. In the case of the Rsc, we developed a cake using a statistical technique known as clustering, and looked at the behaviour of audiences, including things such as their geography, their frequency of attendance, their repertoire preferences, and their price preferences. So once we've got the cake in place, we then layer that with the icing. And for the Rsc project, the icing was made of an attitudinal survey sent to a selection of each of those different audience groups to find out about their thoughts and feelings about the Rsc. This adds to the Rsc's ability to use the segmentation both tactically for mailings and for emails, but also across the company to inform strategy. And I think it's equally important to say that this icing layer could be something like intrinsic impacts data. It's about that meaningful qualitative data that is important for your organisation. And then finally, of course, there is the cherry on top. Once we have our segmentation, then it's really important that we recognise that we learn and grow. So every time our segments are engaging with us, we can understand more about them, what does and doesn't work, what they're interested in, how we can build our engagement with them more deeply. So this is the Rsc Segmentation Engine. I'm sorry, you probably can't see that terribly well, but it allows them to track their different customer segments. They can create alerts so that when somebody changes behaviour or does something new or moves segment, there's an alert and they can undertake different communications to these different groups. I don't know if you can see the names here. These are names in progress, so don't read too much into them. But the point here is that these are segments that are custom to the Rsc, which are meaningful to them. Taking an example of one of those segments with the working name Migrating Swans, again, the names are work in progress, it's then possible to both look at the picture of the segment using the data that's available and layer that up to understand some of the attitudinal behaviours as well. So the Rsc are using this at a tactical level. So for a promotional mailing, they recently created an email which achieved an open rate of 69%. I don't know about Norway, but in the UK, certainly 30% would be good. And a click-through rate of over 8%. Again, in the UK, probably around 3% would be good, and generated a very good outcome in terms of sales. The point here is that you need to create a virtuous circle. If data isn't feeding into your decision-making, your strategic thinking, and into actions, then really it's just interesting. So you need data to be a starting point to inform your understanding of your audiences. That then leads you to set objectives, you can decide strategy, you implement your strategy, and then of course you go back to monitoring and using that data again to inform those objectives and to set strategy. Yankelovich and Mir, who were pioneers of psychographic profiling in the 1960s, believe that a lot that passes for segmentation is a wasteful diversion because it doesn't focus on actual behaviour. As they said in the Harvard Business Review, to be valid, a segmentation must identify groups that matter to performance. And this is why we believe that behavioural segmentation is the foundation, or is the cake. Because ultimately you need to make a difference to behaviours, to how audiences are engaging with your organisation. And then you layer that qualitative data on top to develop your understanding of those different audience groups. So this is an example of a custom segmentation we've developed in the segmentation engine for the Royal Danish Theatre. This one focuses on one of their subscriptions and uses behaviour to identify the champions and most loyal subscribers with high frequency of attendance. They've attended recently, they have a high propensity to donate and become members. And the segmentation goes right through to those who are at risk of lapsing because we're able to track the fact that their frequency is low. We've also identified over 3,000 good prospects for this subscription because they identify similar behaviours, they exhibit similar behaviours to the existing subscribers. Now, I could share many examples of companies acting on data to build audiences, but my favourite is this one, and it demonstrates that you don't have to be a large institution to use data to make a difference. So this is Malmö Stadstheater's old subscription before we worked with them. The subscription required a minimum purchase of 5 shows, but there was no incentive to trade up. So you can see that most subscribers were purchasing either 5 shows in purple or 6 shows in yellow, and very few of them were committing to see all of the productions. Now, of course, we all also know what that means, which is that those subscribers happily choose the easier and more popular repertoire and are perhaps less keen on committing to see those more difficult and challenging productions. We also identified the fact that they had a number of repeat bookers, people who were coming frequently in a year, who weren't subscribing, and that perhaps the minimum commitment of 5 shows was simply too much. So this is the subscription that we developed for them. The silver package is effectively equivalent to the old subscription, so you could see 5 or 6 shows and save 35%. But we created a new incentive, the gold package, with a 50% saving to encourage people to commit to see all of the theatre's productions, so creating a base of sales for all of the productions, including the more difficult and challenging ones. And we created the new bronze package, requiring a minimum commitment of just 3 shows to bring people into the idea of subscribing. And this is the impact. So the number of subscriptions doubled, but crucially nearly 60% of them were at the gold level, so generating that base of sales for all of the productions, including the trickier ones, and this contributed to a 9% increase in overall attendances. I should add that we did some similar work with Stockholm Concert Hall, where we identified low-level frequent bookers who were not subscribing. They created new mini-series to bring them into the concept of subscribing, and their subscriptions have grown by around 15%. Not only that, but they were also able to build the frequency of their core subscribers too, in their case by identifying that it was possible to add concerts to their fixed series, so that those core customers were attending more frequently, and enabling the orchestra to broaden the range of work and the number of concerts that they were giving. So here's a way of thinking about how we can use quantitative data to inform the development of audiences. I'm not grappling here with who is coming, which we'll come on to later on, but thinking just about the development of audiences once they're already through the doors. So typically what our organisations want them to do is to come more often, and very often what we also want them to do is to come to more challenging work. So if you like, what we're asking people to do is to move up from those people right at the bottom who are perhaps coming very infrequently to our very easy repertoire, to come more often and include perhaps some of our more challenging work in the portfolio of attendance. So earlier on I mentioned the concept of repertoire scoring. And I'm sure many of us are familiar with the idea of coding our performances according to traditional genre like classical music, jazz, opera, ballet, or contemporary dance. This is the University Musical Society at the University of Michigan, who are one of our segmentation engine users. They present about 75 performances of touring events of all different genres each year. They wanted to build audiences for a thread of programs cutting across all of their genre called Renegade, focused on innovative, challenging artistic work. And that's where the repertoire scoring comes in. It's a way of ranking all of your performances. So they scored all of their past shows for adventurousness. The more adventurous or difficult work was given a high score, and very safe repertoire that was easy, not very challenging, or quite well known was given a very low score. That's then applied in the segmentation engine to give each booker scores based on the portfolio of performances that they have booked. There's 3 scores: the average score of the performances that they have booked, the minimum score that they have booked, and the maximum score. So this means that you can find people who typically book more adventurous work, but also people who have ever been willing to book adventurous work. So this is UMS's segmentation engine page for average repertoire score, and you can see that they were able to classify people into 3 groups. The low score people were adventurous averse, and the high score people were the adventurous souls. In order to test this approach, they ran a direct mail campaign for the next set of Renegade shows, and they sent it to past renegade buyers. Remember that old-fashioned way of thinking about marketing, the people that have bought stuff like this before. They sent it to theatre buyers, and they sent it to adventurous souls, the people with the appetite for risk. And when they analysed the results in the segmentation engine, they found that the adventurous souls were 20% more likely to purchase tickets than using the traditional marketing approach. So this coding works, but it works in this case because it's relevant to their organisation in terms of the programming that they want to do and build audiences for, and to their audience. So crucially, you can use an approach like this for both audience and programme development. You can use the maximum repertoire score to nudge people towards being more adventurous and to better understand the potential customer base for challenging programming. And anyone who's interested in this approach can find a similar case study about how we developed a repertoire scoring approach for the Los Angeles Phil on our website. So if that's thinking about data at the level of an individual organisation, what about data beyond that? Big data is something of a buzzword, but what do we mean by the term? Well, what makes data big is, of course, the volume of data, but it can also refer to the variety of data, the velocity, the speed at which it is processed in order to make it actionable, not just looking at things that have already happened, the visualization of the data to make it meaningful, and the value of the data. So we talked earlier about developing data that is meaningful to developing the relationship between your organisation and your customers in your terms. The same applies to collaborative data. The data must be meaningful to building the relationship between the cultural ecosystem and the population. Without collaboration, no one organisation has a full picture of the cultural marketplace. By building a collaborative data set, you understand what your customers do when they're not with you. You can better understand the opportunities and ways to build relationships within your existing audience and the gaps that need to be addressed through audience development. I'm going to share some examples of citywide data collaborations, but I also just wanted to share this example that suggests we maybe need to think beyond a city level to build a national picture. This is data taken from the audience engine developed by Jacobson Consulting Applications and sitting on our Arts Engines platform. It's taken from a pilot project for 6 opera companies across the US. Now, these companies literally span the US, from Opera Philadelphia in the east through to Lyric Opera of Chicago, and then San Francisco Opera, Los Angeles Opera, and Seattle Opera on the West Coast. So in some cases, there are nearly 3,000 miles between these organizations, and yet all 6 of them are seeing some level of crossover within their audiences. So even somewhere as large as the US, maybe we need to think a little bit bigger than just simply at a city level. But to bring it back to a city level, in work undertaken for the UK Capital of Culture, Hull 2017, we analysed customers against Experian's mosaic population segmentation to understand the makeup of the customer base and how that compared against the UK population, so how they were doing in terms of who they were reaching and who they weren't. We also undertook penetration of households in the region, always a statistic that the politicians are keen on because they want to know how many of their voters are engaging. But perhaps one of the most compelling findings is the extent to which customers, once they made a return visit, were crossing over between organisations. So what you can see here is that for organisation A, 47% of people only came once in the year, so by definition they could not have crossed over to any of the other organisations. But 53% of people came twice or more often. Of those 53%, just 27% attended twice or more, but only at organisation A, meaning that 73% of those were actually crossing over to attend the other organisations. And you can see across the piece here that there's significant crossover once those people are attending twice or more often. This means that it's in everyone's interest to work together to build repeat attendance, because once we've got somebody coming back for a second time, they're engaging across the sector. Now, okay, you might think, well, that's all very well for those audiences that are perhaps less engaged, the people who are coming once, of course we should work together to bring them back a second time. But what about our loyal audiences? Why should we share those? They're ours. Well, often what we find is that the audiences that organisations perceive as their loyal audience are really nothing of the kind. Audiences displaying high engagement with one organisation are typically highly engaged across the sector. So we did some work in the City of Nottingham, looking at donors. There's often a perception that customers who donate money to an organisation are among its most loyal customers. But in Nottingham we found that not only are donors not venue loyal, they are in fact much more likely to have booked at multiple venues. We also found that those with memberships at multiple organisations were more likely to donate across the city. In other words, increasing audience engagement with the sector overall is likely to boost engagement with your organisation. We found similar trends when working in Malmö. Here is a visual representation of crossover between Malmö Opera, Malmö Live and Malmö Stadstheater, with 19% of customers having attended more than one of the three organisations. And remember that for many of those people not crossing over, again, we're looking at a lot of people who have only attended once and therefore by definition could not have crossed over. So if we look at who it was that was crossing over, again, it was those customers often perceived as an organisation's core and most engaged audiences, such as the subscribers, who we found were engaging more generally. So between a half and 2/3 of subscribers were buying for other organisations in the city. So our challenge is in working together to develop engagement across the ecosystem, to deepen our relationships with the more engaged, and to build engagement from the less engaged. And as an example of this, the organisations in Malmö have recently launched a scheme to develop young audiences in partnership with the university. It's using a concept developed by Baker Richards called Secret Seats. Again, you can find out more about that on our website. The student organisation has taken it upon themselves to do the marketing and administer the website for the scheme, including writing the copy in a way they think is suitable for students. Now, my Swedish isn't very good. In fact, it's non-existent. But this picture is signage from the toilets at the university. I'm reliably informed that the heading reads, "Important shit."
Yeah.
Good. So, here are some key takeaways to share from the presentation today. Building a quantitative and qualitative picture of your audiences helps your organisation make informed decisions, avoiding bias or assumptions, and means you can monitor and learn. The key to making data useful and generating real insight is in how you code it. Consider where the data is actually informing decisions and action in your organisation. Do you have a virtuous circle, or is it just interesting? Remember that data can help inform both programming and audience development. And by segmenting your audience, you can reach the right customers with the right messages. Working together to build a full picture of the marketplace helps you understand the wider behaviour of your own customers, not just what they're doing when they're with you, and who collectively you are not reaching. And this creates the case for collaboration, because the development of new audiences and an increase in repeat visitation benefits the entire cultural ecosystem. And finally, don't forget to make a cake. Thank you very much. I believe we've got about 10 minutes for questions. If anybody has any. Deathly silence.
I have a question.
Olaf.
Obviously, it's very important for us as individual organisations to communicate with our own audience, but as you say, we're talking to the same people who are also attending the theatre and attending dance performances. Do you have good examples of how different organisations, each working on their own, have been able to collaborate together to improve overall sales?
Yeah, there are some good examples in the UK through the historic network of regional audience development agencies, and that work's since been carried on by the national agencies. There have also been some good examples, particularly around the dreaded genre approach. So looking at, for example, building audiences for opera, building audiences for contemporary dance, and that's typically been how those approaches have been undertaken in the past. I think perhaps where there's been less work is around organisations working together cross-genre, because we've had this sort of historic obsession with let's build the opera audience, let's build the dance audience, and we need to perhaps think about our audiences as more eclectic and understand that portfolio of what they're doing. And I'm not immediately thinking of good examples of that, but I will certainly come back to you if I think of some. Yes, is that Kenneth?
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Nice to hear you. One thing we discussed another, since we're not, for instance, in the airline industry, we don't know everybody's in the seats. We only know the ticket buyers. Have you come across anybody who's sold that kind of thing?
So,
Facebook logins or whatever?
Yeah, the Royal Danish Theatre instituted an approach of asking people to give the details of the people that were attending with the booker. Obviously, that you have to think about the data protection permissions. It's the same way when you check in for an airline. If there's multiple people on the booking, the airline asks you to confirm that you have permission to check in for all of the other people. So obviously you have to get that consent up front that you've got permission to provide the details, but haven't got that, then that's a very good approach about building that broader picture, so you've got the picture of the attenders, not just the bookers.
And they receive data from it, or did you just give it?
It's not 100%, but yes. Great. Well, I'm going to be around for the rest of the day, so if anybody has any questions that you don't want to ask in a public forum, but you'd like to have a chat about, come and find me. And once again, thank you very much for putting up with the presentation about data in English. Very much appreciated. Thank you.